Let me ask you something. Do you know the difference between authentication and authorization? What about the difference between Microsoft Entra ID and Azure Active Directory domain services? Or when conditional access fires versus when multi-factor authentication fires? If any of those made you pause, this video is for you. Identity and access management questions are scattered across every domain of the AZ-900, and they're full of terminology traps. Entra ID, RBAC, PIM, SSO, MFA, B2B, B2C. The names are similar, the functions are very different, and the exam knows exactly where to put the distractors. In part 3 of our 10-part series, we are going through 10 questions that will lock in your identity knowledge for good. Stay until the end because question 10 is the one that catches even people who work in Azure every day. Welcome back to Skills on Cloud. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel is all about helping IT professionals build real skills, pass certifications, and interviews. Parts 1 and 2 of this series are linked in the description below. This is part 3 of 10, and we are building toward 100 exam-style questions across the full AZ-900 syllabus. Subscribe and hit the bell so every new part comes straight to you. Quick note before we start. Identity questions on the AZ-900 appear across multiple domains, particularly in Azure Architecture and Services and Azure Management and Governance, which together account for 65 to 75% of the exam. Microsoft also renamed several identity products in recent years. Azure Active Directory is now called Microsoft Entra ID. Azure AD B2C is now Entra External ID for customers. Azure AD B2B is now Entra External ID for partners. The exam uses both old and new names, so you need to recognize both. The passing score remains 700 out of 1,000. Same format as always. I read the question, you think, I reveal the answer, and I explain every option. Let us go. Question 1. A user enters their username and password to log in to an Azure application. The application then checks what resources the user is allowed to access. Which terms correctly describe these two steps respectively? Option A, authorization, then authentication. Option B, authentication, then authorization. Option C, identification, then verification. Option D, validation, then authentication. Take a few seconds to think. The answer is B, authentication, then authorization. Authentication is the process of proving who you are. You do this by providing credentials such as a username and password, a certificate, or a biometric factor. It answers the question, are you really who you claim to be? Authorization is the process of determining what you are allowed to do once your identity has been confirmed. It answers the question, now that we know who you are, what can you access? Option A reverses the order, which is wrong because you must always authenticate before you can be authorized. Options C and D use terms that are not the standard Microsoft definitions for these steps. The memory trick here is simple. Authentication equals who you are. Authorization equals what you can do. And authentication always comes first. Question 2. Which of the following best describes Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory? Option A on-premises directory service for managing Windows Server domain-joined computers. Option B, a cloud-based identity and access management service used to authenticate users and control access to applications and resources. Option C, a virtual private network service for connecting on-premises networks to Azure. Option D, a role-based access control system for managing Azure resource permissions only. Think about what Entra ID actually is. The answer is B, a cloud-based identity and access management service used to authenticate users and control access to applications and resources. Microsoft Entra ID is Microsoft's cloud identity platform. It enables single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and conditional access for both cloud and on-premises applications. Option A describes Active Directory domain services, which is a completely different product. ADDS is the traditional on-premises Windows Server directory service, while Entra ID is cloud-native. Option C describes Azure VPN Gateway or ExpressRoute, not an identity service. Option D partially describes RBAC, But RBAC is a feature that works on top of Entra ID, not a description of Entra ID itself. The core definition to remember: Entra ID equals cloud identity. ADDS equals on-premises domain services. Question 3. A company wants to reduce the risk of compromised passwords by requiring users to verify their identity using a second factor when signing in. Which Azure feature should they enable? Option A, Azure Key Vault. Option B, Conditional Access. Option C, Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication. Option D, Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Take a moment. The answer is C, Microsoft Entra Multi-Factor Authentication, also called MFA. MFA requires users to provide 2 or more verification methods during sign-in. The first factor is typically something you know, like a password. The second factor is something you have, like a phone or authenticator app, or something you are, like a fingerprint. Even if an attacker steals a password, they cannot complete the sign-in without the second factor. Azure Key Vault, Option A, stores secrets and certificates. It has nothing to do with user sign-in verification. Conditional Access, Option B, is a policy engine that can require MFA as a condition, but it is not MFA itself. Think of conditional access as the trigger and MFA as the action. Azure AD Domain Services, Option D, extends on-premises AD to the cloud and does not directly provide MFA. MFA equals second factor at sign-in. Conditional access equals the policy that decides when MFA is required. Question 4. A company has a storage account in Azure. A developer needs to read and write blobs in that storage account but should not be able to delete the storage account itself or change its configuration. Which built-in Azure RBAC role is most appropriate? Option A, Owner. Option B, Contributor. Option C, Storage Blob Data Contributor. Option D, Reader. What do you think? The answer is C, Storage Blob Data Contributor. This role grants the ability to read, write, and delete blobs within a storage account, but it does not grant the ability to manage the storage account itself, such as deleting it or changing its access keys. Owner, Option A, grants full control over all resources, including the ability to assign roles to others. This is far more permission than the developer needs. Contributor, Option B, allows creating and managing all types of Azure resources, but cannot assign roles. It would also allow the developer to delete or modify the storage account configuration, which violates the requirement. Reader, Option D, only allows viewing resources, not writing or modifying them. The principle being tested here is least privilege, and the most scoped role that fits the requirement is Storage Blob Data Contributor. Always match the role to the minimum permission level required for the task. Question 5. An organization wants to enforce a policy that users can only access Microsoft 365 from devices that are marked as compliant in Entra ID and only when signing in from within the corporate network. Which Azure feature enables this kind of context-aware access control? Option A, Multi-Factor Authentication. Option B, Azure Role-Based Access Control. Option C, Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. Option D, Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. Think carefully about what is doing the enforcing here. The answer is C, Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. Conditional Access is an identity-driven policy engine that evaluates signals such as user identity, device compliance state, location, and application being accessed, and then enforces access controls like blocking access, requiring MFA, or requiring a compliant device. It is the feature that lets you say, only allow access if the device is compliant and the user is on the corporate network. Multi-factor authentication, Option A, adds a second verification factor but cannot evaluate device compliance or network location on its own. RBAC, Option B, controls what a user can do within Azure resources, not whether they can sign in at all. Privileged Identity Management, Option D, manages just-in-time access to privileged roles and does not evaluate device or network conditions at sign-in. Conditional access is the answer anytime the question mentions if-then access logic based on user, device, or location signals. Stop here for a second. 5 questions down, 5 to go. Drop your score out of 5 in the comments right now. I want to see how everyone is tracking on identity. Also, here's a question for you. What is the thing you find most confusing about Azure identity concepts? Is it the product names, the role differences, the conditional access logic? Tell me in the comments, and I will make sure the explanation in the second half addresses it directly. Alright, 5 more, and I promise question 10 will make you think twice. Question 6. A company is running legacy applications that require traditional Active Directory features such as domain join, group policy, and LDAP. The company wants to move to Azure without rewriting these applications. Which Azure Identity Service should they use? Option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Option B, Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Option C, Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. Option D, Azure Key Vault. Take a second. The answer is B, Azure Active Directory Domain Services, also known as Azure ADDS or Entra Domain Services. This service provides managed domain services including domain join, group policy, LDAP, and Kerberos and NTLM authentication in the cloud, without the need to deploy, manage, or patch domain controllers. It is designed specifically for legacy applications that cannot be refactored to use modern authentication. Microsoft Entra ID, Option A, is cloud-native and uses modern authentication protocols like OAuth and SAML. It does not support LDAP, Kerberos, or group policy natively. The question specifically mentions legacy features like group policy and LDAP, which is the key signal that Azure ADDS is the answer, not Entra ID. Entra ID equals modern cloud identity. Azure ADDS equals legacy domain services in the cloud. These are two different products, and the exam loves to test whether you know the difference. Question 7. A company wants to ensure that users who need access to sensitive Azure management roles, such as Global Administrator, only have that access when they specifically request it for a limited time period, rather than having it permanently assigned. Which Microsoft Entra feature enables this? Option A, multi-factor authentication. Option B, conditional access. Option C, privileged identity management. Option D, role-based access control. Think about just-in-time access. The answer is C, privileged identity management, commonly known as PIM. PIM enables just-in-time privileged access to Azure resources and Entra ID roles. Instead of having permanent role assignments, users are made eligible for a role and must activate it when needed, typically with a justification and approval workflow for a defined time window. Once the time window expires, the access is automatically revoked. This dramatically reduces the risk of standing privileged access being misused or compromised. Multi-factor authentication, Option A, adds a second sign-in factor, but does not control role assignment duration. Conditional access, Option B, evaluates sign-in conditions, but does not manage time-limited role activation. RBAC, Option D, is the system for assigning roles, but it does not by itself enable just-in-time or time-limited activation. The phrase just-in-time privileged access maps directly to PIM every time. Question 8. A retail company wants to allow its customers to create their own accounts and sign into its shopping application using social identity providers, such as Google and Facebook. Which Microsoft Entra feature is designed for this scenario? Option A, Microsoft Entra B2B collaboration. Option B, Microsoft Entra External ID for Customers, previously called Azure AD B2C. Option C, Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. Option D, Microsoft Entra ID Single Sign-On. You should be able to narrow this down quickly. The answer is B, Microsoft Entra External ID for Customers, the service previously known as Azure AD B2C. This service is specifically built for consumer-facing applications. It allows customers to register and sign in using their own email address or social identity accounts like Google, Facebook, or Apple, while the company maintains full control over the user experience and identity policies. Microsoft Entra B2B collaboration, Option A, is designed for inviting external business partners and guest users to access your own organization's applications. It is partner to business, not consumer to business. PIM, Option C, manages privileged role access for internal administrators. Entra ID Single Sign-On. Option D. Enables seamless access across multiple enterprise applications for your own employees, not public customers. The rule here is B2B equals business partners and guests. External ID for customers equals consumer sign-up and sign-in with social logins. Question 9. An organization has deployed 50 software-as-a-service applications for its employees. Each application currently requires a separate login. The organization wants employees to log in once and have seamless access to all 50 applications without re-entering credentials. Which Microsoft Entra feature achieves this? Option A. Multi-factor authentication. Option B. Privileged identity management. Option C. Conditional access. Option D. Single sign-on. Take your time. The answer is D. Single sign-on, also called SSO. Single sign-on allows a user to authenticate once with their Entra ID credentials and then access all connected applications without being prompted for credentials again. Microsoft Entra ID supports SSO for thousands of pre-integrated SaaS applications including Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Microsoft 365, as well as custom applications. Multi-factor authentication, Option A, adds a second factor at sign-in, but does not reduce the number of sign-ins required across different applications. Privileged identity management, Option B, manages time-limited role access for administrators, not everyday application access for all users. Conditional access, Option C, controls the conditions under which sign-in is allowed, but does not itself reduce or consolidate authentication across applications. The phrase log in once and access everything describes single sign-on precisely. And here we are. Question 10. I told you this one catches people who work in Azure every day, so do not rush it. A company's IT administrator has been assigned the global administrator role in Microsoft Entra ID. A colleague has been assigned the owner role on the company's Azure subscription. Which of the following statements is correct? Option A, the global administrator has full control over all Azure resources in the subscription. Option B, the owner has full control over all users and groups in Microsoft Entra ID. Option C, the global administrator manages identity in Entra ID, while the owner manages resources in the Azure subscription. These are separate permission scopes. Option D, both roles are identical and grant the same level of access across both Entra ID and Azure resources. Take your time on this one. Think about where each role lives. The answer is C. The global administrator manages identity in Entra ID, while the owner manages resources in the Azure subscription, and these are separate permission scopes. This is one of the most misunderstood concepts in Azure identity. Global administrator is the highest privilege role in Microsoft Entra ID. It controls users, groups, applications, and identity settings. But it does not automatically grant access to Azure subscription resources like virtual machines, storage accounts, or databases. The owner role in Azure RBAC grants full control over all resources within a specific scope, such as a subscription or resource group. But the owner role does not grant any privileges in Entra ID. These are two completely separate permission systems. Entra ID uses Entra roles. Azure resources use Azure RBAC roles. A global administrator can elevate themselves to gain Azure access through a specific setting, but by default they have no subscription resource access. Option A is wrong because global admin scope is Entra ID, not Azure resources. Option B is wrong because the owner role scope is Azure resources, not Entra ID identity management. Option D is completely wrong. These roles operate in entirely different planes. Global admin equals Entra ID identity plane. Owner equals Azure resource management plane. They do not cross over by default. In part 4 of the series, we are moving into Azure architecture. 10 questions covering Azure regions, availability zones, region pairs, resource groups, Azure Resource Manager, and subscriptions. Architecture questions look simple on the surface, but the exam uses extremely precise language to separate the right answer from 3 very convincing wrong ones. If you have ever confused an availability zone with an availability set or a region pair with a geography, Part 4 is going to fix that for good. See you there. If this video helped you understand Azure Identity better, please hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more IT professionals who are on the same certification journey as you. If you're not subscribed yet, you have about 10 seconds before the end screen appears. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so Part 4 drops straight into your feed. Thank you for watching. Keep building those cloud skills. I will see you in Part 4.